I still remember the exact smell of her kitchen the morning everything changed. Coffee and cinnamon, which was basically the scent of safety my entire life. My mom was just standing at the counter, humming to herself. I'd just driven 4 hours straight to surprise her for her birthday. I was standing there, holding this gift bag and a card I spent way too long picking out. I had absolutely no idea she'd been quietly dismantling my life. I really need to back up a bit so this makes sense. My name doesn't really matter right now. What matters is that I was 31, recently divorced, and trying so hard to rebuild my life. The divorce itself wasn't the massive tragedy everyone assumed it was. Marcus and I had just grown in opposite directions, you know? We actually parted ways with a lot more grace than most couples manage. It was a slow fade. No real cruelty involved. But what actually broke me was how fast everything else in my life unraveled right after. I felt like the ground just gave out beneath me. Friendships I'd had for years just quietly faded out. A huge career opportunity I was banking on somehow never came through. I couldn't even get approved for a basic apartment, even though my credit was totally fine. Everything had this weird, just out of reach vibe to it. It was like I was running as fast as I could toward a finish line, and someone kept moving it a few inches further away. I spent so much time just blaming myself for all of it. I figured I was doing something wrong, or that I was just broken after the split. That's what you do when you love someone unconditionally. You just assume the people closest to you have your back. You haven't learned yet that unconditional love can actually be weaponized against you. And my mom was the center of my world. My mother, Patricia, was the kind of woman who made everyone around her feel completely chosen. She had this crazy gift for attention. She'd lean in when you talked and remember every tiny detail. After the divorce, I moved back to my home state. Not right to her town, but closer, about 4 hours away instead of 12. We started talking a lot more. I was seeing her more too. She became one of my primary anchors again, and I really leaned into that. I was hurting, and she was my mom. What I didn't know was that she'd been talking to Marcus. And not just talking, staying in contact regularly, secretly. For years, I found out almost by accident. I was visiting her one weekend, and my phone had completely died. I just needed to look something up really quick. So I borrowed her iPad. It was just sitting right there on the coffee table. I didn't think anything of it. I just opened the browser. When the screen loaded, there was an email thread still pulled up. It took me a few seconds to even understand what I was looking at. My brain just kind of stalled. The name at the very top was Marcus. The most recent message was from 3 days before, and my mother's name was right there in the sender field. I want to tell you that I immediately confronted her. I want to say I swept into that room with fire and clarity, but that's not what happened. The truth is, I sat there for probably 10 full minutes just reading. Trapped. I couldn't look away. Every message was like another piece of my life being handed over. It wasn't a romantic betrayal. It was something almost worse, because it was so deliberate. And the longer I read, the colder I got. It wasn't a romantic thing. I know that's where your mind goes, but it wasn't that kind of betrayal. It was something almost worse, because it was so deliberate. My mother had been feeding Marcus information about me throughout our entire marriage. Small things at first. She told him when I was struggling, things I'd confided in her, and he used it. Not always cruelly, sometimes just practically, like a map. He knew exactly where I was vulnerable before I even knew I was walking into an argument. There was one email I keep coming back to.
She wrote, "She seems to be doing better, which I thought you should know." Like I was a project they were managing.
The worst part was a line further down. She wrote, "I just want what's best for her, and I think you too still have a chance."
She genuinely believed it.
I closed the iPad, went to sleep in her guest room, and said absolutely nothing. I needed time to figure out what I was actually dealing with before I opened my mouth. I drove home the next morning. I spent 2 weeks going very quiet and very still. I did something I had never really done before with my mother. I started paying attention to the pattern. And once I started looking, I honestly could not stop seeing it. It was everywhere. The way she gently discouraged me from certain friendships over the years.
Always with a reason that sounded reasonable.
Always framed as concern, like she was just looking out for me. She'd been pruning my life for years, and I'd let her do it because she was my mother, and mothers are supposed to tend to things. I finally picked up the phone and called a therapist. It was honestly the first real thing I did just for myself. I just needed someone completely outside the situation to help me think straight. In our second session, she said something that completely rearranged my brain. I'd been wasting so much energy trying to figure out why my mom did it. I was desperate to find a version of the story where she was innocent. She told me the goal right now isn't to understand her. The goal is to figure out what I want to do from here. It hit me that understanding and accountability are two totally different things.
I had to decide my next move.
I decided to get my house in order first, quietly, before I said a word. I pulled my credit report to see what actually happened with that apartment. I needed hard facts, not just the vague excuses I'd been fed. Then I called the apartment complex that had turned me down. I asked them some really specific questions about my application. The answers I got pretty much confirmed my worst suspicions. I didn't stop there. I tracked down an old coworker to ask about that job reference that just vanished. We talked for a while, and it was obvious someone had poisoned the well. I started keeping meticulous records of everything I found. It wasn't for a lawsuit or anything, it was just for me. I knew my mom would look me right in the eye and tell me I was crazy. I needed to know exactly what I knew so she couldn't talk me out of my own reality. 6 weeks went by since I found that email. 6 weeks of just steadying my hands and getting ready. Finally, the day came. I didn't want to scream, and I definitely didn't want to put on a show. I just picked up my phone, dialed her number, and waited. Miles away, in the house I used to call home, the phone rang. She answered with that same warm, perfect voice she always uses. She had absolutely no idea it was all about to come crashing down. I didn't yell, and I didn't put on a show. I just calmly laid out exactly what I had found. I gave her the specific dates of the emails I've read. I told her what I knew about the apartment and the job reference. On the other end of the line, the silence was absolutely deafening. I could practically hear the walls of her secret little world collapsing. She realized pretty quick that I wasn't asking for an explanation. I was just calling to tell her that I knew. I kept my voice completely level the entire time. I didn't leave any room for her to twist the narrative or make me doubt myself. I just read the facts straight from my notes. It was like reading a grocery list. Then the tears started. She cried. Of course she did. She immediately went on the defensive, swearing up and down it wasn't what it looked like. She kept saying I was completely misunderstanding her intentions. She told me she was only trying to help. She actually claimed she thought Marcus and I were meant for each other. And then she said she was terrified of losing me after the divorce.
that she panicked when I moved away.
I didn't interrupt her. I just sat there and listened to all of it. I let her say every single thing she felt she needed to say. I let her empty the tank, trying to justify what she'd done. When she finally ran out of words, I took a breath.
I said, I believe that you believe that.
And then I told her I was going to need some time away from her. She wasn't prepared for how calm I was.
I think she'd braced herself for a massive blow-up.
She wanted something she could push back against, an argument she could win.
The quiet boundary was way harder for her to fight.
I hung up the phone. The apartment was completely silent. But for the first time in years, it didn't feel lonely at all. It actually felt like the air had finally been cleared, like I could breathe again. That was the beginning of my 8 months of silence. 8 months of very limited contact. Just enough to make sure she was okay, but definitely not enough to let her back into my orbit. I needed that space to rebuild. I spent those 8 months rebuilding my life from the ground up. I found a new apartment in a neighborhood I picked entirely on my own. I didn't ask for anyone's input. I took a job I was actually excited about, something that felt like mine. I started letting myself get close to people I'd previously kept at arm's length. Sometimes I'd kept my distance because my mother had planted little seeds of doubt about them. Other times, I'd just been so collapsed into her orbit that I hadn't made room for anyone else. I started to figure out what my own preferences actually were, separate from her. For so long, I only knew what I liked based on what she reflected back at me. It sounds a little dramatic to say I didn't know myself, but the honest truth is that I had always known myself through her. And that is a very specific kind of not knowing. I was finally finding my footing, finally feeling like I had some control when something completely unexpected happened. What I wasn't expecting at all was to hear from Marcus. About 5 months into my silence with my mother, he called me. He'd somehow found out that she and I were estranged. He said he wanted to apologize for everything. I want to be fair here because his apology was not nothing. He admitted that he'd been angry after the divorce and that he'd used information he never should have had access to. He told me he regretted the apartment situation, the job reference, and a few other things. Things I hadn't even fully connected to him yet. He didn't try to minimize any of it. He said, I was hurt, and I did something I'm really not proud of. And your mother made it so much easier than it should have been. I didn't forgive him in that phone call. I told him I appreciated him saying it, and that I needed to think about what I wanted to do with it. But I want to tell you what that call actually did for me. It closed a door I hadn't even known was still open. Something in me had been waiting to find out if I'd just imagined it all. I needed to know if I'd overread things or if the story I'd put together was accurate. And here was the other person in the story telling me, no, it was real. Here is what actually happened. There's a very particular kind of relief that comes from having your reality confirmed, especially when someone spent years making you doubt it. My mother and I are in contact again now. Not the way we were before. I don't think we'll ever be the way we were before, and I've finally made my peace with that. What we have now is something more honest, even if it's smaller. She knows exactly where my lines are. She knows that I'll leave if she crosses one. That's not the relationship I would have chosen. But I'm no longer willing to choose warmth over truth. The hardest part wasn't even confronting her. If you're listening to this and something in it is landing a little close, I want you to know something. The hardest part was accepting that the safety I'd always felt with her was real, but it wasn't the whole story. Both of those things were true at once. She had been my home, and she had been doing harm.
I had to learn to hold both of those things without letting either one cancel the other out. The love was real, and the betrayal was also real. You don't have to choose which one to believe. What you do get to choose is what you do next. Stepping out that door wasn't just about leaving an apartment. It was about entering a life that actually belonged to me. No strings attached, no hidden agendas. You don't realize how heavy the invisible weight is until it's finally gone. For the first time in years, I was just a person walking down a street. Nobody was tracking my progress or reporting back. I started noticing other people more, wondering what secret architectures they were living inside, what versions of love they were trying to survive. Sometimes I still catch the scent of coffee and cinnamon. For a split second, my brain tries to pull me back to that kitchen, back to the illusion of how things used to be. But then I take a breath, and I remember I can make my own coffee. I can buy my own cinnamon. I get to keep the good things and leave the poison behind. Rebuilding isn't a straight line. Some days are just about enjoying the quiet in a room where nobody is taking notes on your flaws. I started keeping a different kind of record. Not as evidence for a trial that was never going to happen, but as proof that I was actually here. Writing down my own thoughts, my own preferences, making sure the voice in my head was actually mine, and not just an echo of someone else's expectations. It takes time to trust the ground under your feet. Especially when your old foundation was built on sand. But every single day, it gets a little more solid. So yeah, the love was real, and the betrayal was real. I carry both of them with me. But this peace I have now, this is the realest thing of all. I was about 5 months into my new life when the phone rang. I looked down at the screen and my stomach just dropped. It was Marcus. I almost didn't answer it. But when I finally picked up, he sounded totally different. He told me he knew my mom and I weren't talking and he wanted to apologize. To be fair to him, the apology wasn't nothing. He admitted he was angry after the divorce. He said he used information he never should have had access to. He actually named the apartment situation and the job reference that went cold. He didn't make excuses. He just said, "I was hurt, and your mother made it easy." I didn't forgive him right then and there. I just told him I appreciated him saying it and that I needed some time to think. Hanging up that phone did something incredible for me. It closed a door I didn't even know was still open. I think part of me was still wondering if I'd just imagined it all. But hearing him say it, it proved I wasn't crazy. The story I put together was exactly what happened. There's this massive relief that comes when your reality is finally confirmed. My mom and I are actually in contact again now, but it's not the way it was before. We meet up sometimes, but I keep it pretty brief. She knows exactly where my lines are, and she knows I'll walk away if she crosses them. It's a smaller relationship, sure, but it's honest. I'm not willing to choose warmth over truth anymore. But honestly, the hardest part was accepting that the safety I felt with her was real, but it wasn't the whole story. I always thought love had to be simple to be real. I figured if someone was your home, they couldn't be the storm that wrecks it. But the truth? My mom was both of those things, at the exact same time. Holding those two realities in my head almost tore me apart. I kept trying to let one cancel the other out. If the betrayal was real, the love must have been a lie. But forcing that just kept me trapped. The love she gave me was entirely real. The warmth, the late-night calls, none of that was faked. But the secret emails and the quiet sabotage,
That was just as real. You don't have to choose which one to believe.
Once I stopped trying to solve the puzzle of my mom, my life finally had room to breathe. I didn't need to understand her motives to protect myself.
I just needed a space where her shadow couldn't reach me.
And slowly, that's exactly what I did.
I bought this leather notebook a while back.
It wasn't for keeping records of her lies anymore. It was just for me. I started writing down the things I actually wanted, without anyone there to mirror them back.
It sounds so simple.
But when you've spent 30 years as an extension of someone else, knowing your own favorite color feels like a revolution. I wrote down goals that had nothing to do with her. The exhaustion of it all eventually faded. It got replaced by this quiet, sturdy kind of energy. I wasn't running away anymore. And I definitely wasn't waiting for an apology. I was just sitting in my own living room, totally present. There are still days when I miss the illusion. I miss walking into her kitchen, smelling cinnamon, thinking I was completely safe. But the grief of losing that illusion? It's a price I'll gladly pay for the reality I have now. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. And for the first time, that doesn't terrify me. It feels like a blank page that belongs exclusively to me. No one's reading over my shoulder. My old life was built on secrets by someone who thought control was love. I had to let that house burn down just to see the sky. You don't get to choose how people betray you, but you do get to choose what you do next.